It's entirely believable that 9/11 happened as a result of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. treatment of Muslims and their religious fanatic. Probably entirely believable that people in upper echelons of power would be less inclined to solve the problem.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves a new world order,
and more just allow the problem to persist, as never let a good tragedy go to waste, you know.
1 in 5 Americans believe the U.S. government was involved in 9/11.
There was a lot of pull to get involved in the Middle East, specifically Iraq. I mean, Afghanistan I think is a little bit different, but especially Iraq. The question I always ask myself is, people lie and cheat.
The President of the United States is blind!
You know, just for the fun of winning. And so, and people lie and cheat in their careers and jobs. So if you had the ability to do it, to lie and cheat your way to the ultimate seat of power in the world, why wouldn't you? Like, it's not a question of if they try, it's how much they try and how much they get away with and how much is caught. You know, that's the real question.
What's up, guys? Thanks for tuning in. Before you watch this video, if you could like and subscribe, that would be amazing. I'm trying to get up my followers. I'm also on Spotify, Instagram, and TikTok too. Anything helps. If you could share the video, like it, share it to a friend, post it on social media, that'd be awesome. As you can tell by the title, this is the third part, the final chapter of my series on 9/11. I just wanted to do a third part because there's a couple more things regarding American foreign policy and stuff that actually happened at Ground Zero that I really wanted to cover. So me and Joe really get into the niche of that. And of course, you know, all respect to the 9/11 families and the people, you know, that died that day. This is not to make light or dismiss any of their pain or what was going on, but really to point a finger at, you know, possibly bigger things that were going on at the time. So buckle up. This is, I think, a really appropriate but concluding chapter of the 9/11 series. So once again, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for liking and subscribing, and see you next time. Peace. What's up, guys? This is the last house on the left. This is where I chop it up with my friends, kill time, and speak what's on my mind. This is Down the Rabbit Hole Part 3. Thanks for coming on, Joe. So I originally thought I was only going to do like 2 parts of this, but there's so much to this. I think, once again, to add even more context, like, we really didn't even cover a lot of we referenced a couple things like possible controlled demolitions or whatever, but we're going to talk a lot about kind of American foreign policy and like George Bush, like Cheney, but then we're also going to go through all the different 9/11 conspiracies. So just as one more quick preface, I think, you know, all respect to the 9/11 victims and families, obviously. It's so interesting how I was just saying a second ago, how 9/11 and everything that happened like 24 years ago is really kind of being rehashed in the media right now. Obviously, it's been, you know, the 24th anniversary was just a couple days ago, and not worser things, but also other terrible things in society are happening. So thanks for coming back, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Sorry I missed the first 2. So I don't know how much I can add or subtract from it, but we'll see.
Yeah, and so for anyone, if you're just jumping on a Part 3 before you watch Part 1 or Part 2, Part 1 with my friends Shane and Dan, we covered basically like the history of bin Laden, like his upbringing, and then we talked about Al Qaeda, like their formations through you know, even through like, you know, Egypt, Afghanistan, meeting with or you know, Al Qaeda merging with Al Jihad, which was Zawahiri's his second in commands. Their terrorist organization in Egypt. And then we talked about the hijackers, obviously everyone in the Hamburg cell, Atta, Jarrah, Hanjor, all that stuff. And then Part 2, we covered the actual timeline, so everything that happened on the actual day. Covered the horrors of Ground Zero. We talked about the conflict between, you know, the intelligence agencies, and we especially highlighted the FBI, especially under John O'Neill and their counterterrorism chief, until he ended up getting axed. It's actually really interesting. I mentioned this last episode, is that they have a short series called The Looming Tower on Hulu, and it actually just focuses on John O'Neill and this guy Michael Scheuer. So once again, guys, to rehash a couple things. So the John O'Neill under the FBI, he was hoping to go and like find bin Laden and prosecute him and bring him back to America and hold him for his crimes. While the CIA, they were trying to do they were trying to either flip him or they were trying to kill him. There was no in between. But they didn't want him prosecuted because, I mean, you know how intelligence agencies go about their their businesses, you know.
Well, you wouldn't want him testifying. You know, sure they wouldn't want that.
Yeah. Get a little bit more on the mic, if you don't mind.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just like right into it. Yeah. Actually, you finally have a mic arm that works. I remember in the past.
Well, it's always
We used
cool.
to
We
not.
usually have 3 or 4 people, so it's like something's going to break.
Yeah, so this is nice, man. Well, it's good. Besides, I haven't had you on since episode, I believe, 13 or 14, and that was when we didn't have, like I said, didn't have the mics working. So thankfully, those days are behind me. So, so just this one stat I wanted to throw out there before we got into everything is that right now in society, Joe, like 1 in 5 Americans believe the U.S. government was involved in 9/11, and so that's always
Who did that poll? Do you know? Like,
I should go look it up. I think it was Reuters.
Huh.
Do you think it's higher, or do you think it's?
I'd just be interested to see, like, did they interview like 50 people or did they interview like 30,000? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Okay. Well, give me a second to find that. I'll throw this over to you. So,
Plus, how do they phrase it too? That's always the interesting thing. Is like, how do you phrase a survey or
poll?
something like
Yeah,
that?
because
Was it just one question about 9/11, or were there a bunch of questions that were leading the person to think one way or the other? It's I don't know. Sometimes you don't see that stuff, and you just see the poll. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that, and then,
yeah. No, let me look this up for a second.
I mean, I believe it. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, 20% of people.
Yeah, but think about how many people, like, do the math for that. Like, you're good at math, right? So the 330 million in America, and about
20% of people, about
20% of that.
60, 70 million people.
That's a lot of people, man. I think it's also really possible too, and that's one of the big reasons why. I mean, doing down the rabbit hole is interesting because you just kind of take a topic and then you just kind of like really get into it. I mean, it takes a lot of is that mic arm?
Are you good?
Okay. Sometimes the way that people can just throw out, oh, it was an inside job. George Bush did 9/11. I really think that's kind of dangerous just to throw out there. It's also very, as we were just talking about off air a couple minutes ago, it's very easy to just jump on conspiracies and cabals and all this stuff like going on, these undercurrents of, higher echelons of society. I don't know. It seems a little... I think also, once again, just the internet, you can find a lot of information, but you can find a lot of disinformation. And so, I guess what would be your thoughts on, do you think 9/11 was an inside job? Because even that, you just talked about the phrasing of the actual question for that survey, right? I'm kind of already setting you up for kind of failure in a way where it's like, is it yes or no? Well, it's kind of
that's
both.
The thing, I think any person that is honest about it, they couldn't say one way or the other. Because it's like especially for younger people, it might be one thing for someone who was there or someone who has more information, like, some government official or something like that. Like Edward Snowden with the NSA, like there might be someone who has verifiable information. But for me, it's like, I don't know. I've always said I wouldn't be surprised if there was some irrefutable evidence or something close to that where people were like, yeah, this is what happened. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, some people are convinced that the moon landing never happened.
Yeah.
If there was convincing evidence that it didn't, I would be surprised, because it's like that's something that pretty easily is, in my mind, easy to prove did happen. But that's one of those crazy ones.
I think, but look how popular it is So another great example of this for me, this is a personal take. Like, I look at someone like Candace Owens right now. Like, well, me and Joe were just discussing on maybe doing a future episode on some of the recent stuff going on and really tragedies going on in society right now. But like, Candace Owens was she was very close to Charlie Kirk and whatever, and she just put out like an hour and 25-minute episode about how she thinks like Israel's behind like his death. And I was like, are we really going to start doing this like that early? And she was a very close person of like very close to the actual, person or victim of the family. So I feel like you look at the typical conspiracy, there's like, okay, you mentioned the moon landing, JFK's assassination. throw in MK Ultra, throw in 9/11, throw in Iran Contra or something else, and you just start. Once again, I know it's a very common phrase to say, "Oh, I'm going down the rabbit hole" or whatever. I was talking to Dad about some of this stuff about. Are you familiar with
the episode name?
Yeah, exactly. Are you familiar with what was going on in 2003 in Iraq called Abu Ghraib? It was like a prison where there was a lot of human rights violations from American soldiers.
Familiar, I've heard of it. I mean,
yeah, disgusting stuff, man. Like just you would take like Iraqi citizens, and this was the time when not only were a lot of we're sending a ton of troops overseas and whatever, we're also sending a lot of like contractors, whether it was from Blackwater or this other institution called CACI or Titan. I just watched a documentary called Iraq for Sale, which I'll bring up later.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Like, especially if you were like a military guy and you didn't, because some people just don't like the hierarchy of the military, but they're talented, and so why not get paid millions of dollars to?
Yeah, because they got paid the average Blackwater person got paid so much more than the average.
Well, yeah, because it's government contract,
soldier.
and there's not that much of a bidding war. Most of these companies would maybe they didn't, but I would imagine they would kind of allow each other to make as much money as possible.
Right, and you said bidding war, right? So I wanted to bring that up with Halliburton and Soon and whatever, but I would like to throw this over to you really quick. Just I did cover George Bush and Cheney a little bit, but I was wondering if you could give maybe a better. I think you know a little bit more history than I do, but I just kind of covered that when George Bush came into his presidency, he was actually a little bit inexperienced from what I saw before as he was getting in, and that's why Cheney was his vice president as like an experienced guy. He was a former chief of staff or like part of the intelligence committees, etc. So
I mean, to be honest, I'm not too familiar with like pre 9/11 Bush policy. Like there's you could talk about how him and his father had sort of the same political goals, and that's something that I've always seen, that whether 9/11 was an inside job or not, which is a big if, or big whether, there was a lot of pull to get involved in the Middle East, specifically Iraq. I mean, Afghanistan I think is a little bit different, but especially Iraq, because like you had the Gulf War 2001, that was 5 years.
Yeah.
What was COVID was 5 years ago. It's not like it was that far out of recent memory it was 91, so that would have been 10 years, so that's still like the first Trump presidency basically. That whole election cycle, that was 10 years ago. That doesn't feel very long ago.
No, I don't think so.
So it's not crazy to see that between Bush and his father that there would be some sort of incentive or initiative to get involved in the Middle East. And I'm sure Dick, like you said, Dick Cheney was kind of that. A lot of people at the time were like, Dick Cheney's this evil puppet master, and Bush is an idiot.
Yeah.
So Dick Cheney's really in charge, and to what degree that's true, honestly, I don't know. I was way too young at the time to even comprehend stuff like that. So it was, I don't know. If it was or not, I don't think it changes how like events happened.
Okay, because I don't want to be the person that's like, I watched a documentary, so I know everything. Well, absolutely.
And he's still vice president. Like it's not like this guy was like a Rasputin type where he's like not even a political figure and he's whispering in the guy's ear. Like he was the vice president, the people elected him, and if he had more of a sway in Bush's cabinet than other people, it may be evil if their intentions were evil, but that in and of itself isn't that crazy in politics to me. But maybe it should be. But
arguably, he was the most powerful vice president ever, though.
That's a Shane question. I don't know. I mean, of the recent times, yeah, probably, but I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah, it's up for debate, right?
I'd be curious to see how much like influence Kamala Harris had on the Biden administration, because it's clear Biden didn't have very much influence on his own administration. So
yeah, I think that's
like
I don't think that's like an unpopular take.
Well, she came out with this new book too. Basically,
did she?
Oh yeah, she threw Biden and his wife under the bus for making it their decision whether they were going to rerun, and she's pissed she lost. She's not wrong.
That is one little thing where you can actually give it to
She's not
Harris.
wrong.
She had only 4 months to like run her campaign, and it wasn't In my humble opinion, it wasn't that good.
Well, then someone shot Trump, so I mean, I don't think that's gonna. Like, that's just. I'm surprised she did as well as she did as well, to be honest. But yeah, I don't know. That's definitely a Shane question. Like, yeah, there could have been some vice presidents in the 19th century that were more influential, but probably not. So yeah, you're probably right there. I mean, LBJ was pretty influential as vice president too. And
guess what I just started?
I mean, Truman was. Truman was pretty influential as.
Yeah, because who was Truman was under
FDR.
FDR, right? Okay. What I meant to say earlier was that I just started Vietnam in HD. I don't know.
Good show.
I don't know about Vietnam.
You want? I mean, you want to talk about like crazy? Yeah, that's
dude.
A lot of our culture.
2.5 million Americans went over there to fight. That's crazy.
It was a 10-year-long conflict. It was Iraq before Iraq. Iraq last
literally,
but it was a lot worse. Like for all the horrible things.
How many people died in Vietnam? Like 60,000.
It was a lot, but it was also just. I could talk about Vietnam all day long. I mean, not from personal experience, obviously, but just the social zeitgeist that it was and how.
Whoa! U.S. and military deaths 282,000.
Yeah.
Whoa!
I mean, a lot of that might be South Vietnamese too.
Whoa!
But like, it's funny because parallel to like Korea or something like that. That's why I've always found Korean War an interesting thing because
it says here 40K Americans.
Yeah, because there was a lot of South Vietnamese but that's still 10 times as many as the Afghanistan war in half the time.
Yeah, because there's about 7,000 that died.
And not to mention the problem with the Iraq and Afghanistan, a lot of maimings, IEDs, and things like that. But same thing with Vietnam. There was just that, and they had POWs. People were, like McCain, like, was tortured for like 5 years in Hanoi.
Right.
And
Trump's like
he couldn't for the rest of his life. This is as far up as he could lift his arms because they broke his freaking his I think it was his collarbone like 5 times.
That was
or
a disgusting
like
thing. I remember Trump saying like he was a coward, that he was like.
Oh yeah, and that's why I'm like I was saying earlier. He's just despisable person sometimes in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And so going back to Cheney, so this documentary, it's on Prime. It's called The World According to Dick Cheney. It goes and talks about how he was like Bush originally wanted him on, and then he refused because before Bush even became like the head runner of the Republican Party, he tried to run on his own, and it was a disgrace where he like basically blew all this money and wasn't charming or charismatic enough.
Oh, I can see that. I mean, I guess. If he was a terrible candidate and they spent a lot of money on him, that'd be a waste. I don't know anything about. He wasn't a very appealable person, and it is surprising that they made him VP.
Yeah. So basically, George Bush at least brought him on to say, "Hey, can you at least help me find the right person?" So basically, Cheney made this extreme vetting process for each different candidate that they were looking at, or basically they're looking into your tax records for over a decade.
Oh yeah,
all these things in your background. Yeah, and so it ended up being that at the end of right before when they really needed to decide, all right, who's going to be on the card, right? Bush doubles down and says, "You are the only one who I trust to take this position," and so Dick Cheney, finally reluctantly agreed.
Yeah,
but it's interesting because when he became vice president, he didn't go through any of the vetting process that he set up. Interesting, huh?
Well, yeah,
just interesting. Not like.
But in my mind, as awful as that is, that's just politics in a lot of ways. Like. Did he step on people to get where he was? I mean, yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Bush was... How old was Bush when he got elected? He was relatively young.
I think he
especially considered now.
Mid-40s.
To go from Biden, the oldest president, to Trump, the oldest president ever, is just...
He was 54 when he became president.
That's pretty young, because Kennedy was only...
Kennedy...
40s, right?
Yeah.
30s? Because you got to be 36, right? What is it? Yeah, I'm embarrassed. I don't know that.
Oh, come on, AI overview. I thought he was late 30s.
It could have been. I know you can't.
No. I'm sorry. 43 years. Okay, 43.
Which, people say that's really young for a president. That is. So 53.
Yeah.
So that, Bush was this kind of young, charismatic guy from Texas, and that whole campaign's really interesting too, because Florida, people. You want to talk about like conspiracy theories and stuff like that. People still think that election was rigged one way or the other.
The Bush one?
Yeah. They didn't know the result of the 2000
That's when he
election
ran
for like a month. They didn't know who won for like a month because Florida.
Right.
It was
that
a
was
tie.
Gore, right?
Well, it wasn't a tie, but it was basically whoever won Florida would win the whole thing. And they used the paper punch ballots down there, so they must have recounted. I don't remember the exact number of times and all that, but there were like 5 Supreme Court cases, states suing other states, politicians suing to get this done and recounts. And then they're like, well, every time you recount it, there's a likelihood that you break some of the ballots. That's the hanging chads. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it must have been a month they didn't know. And so people are still talking about that, which is fair. I mean, that's kind of crazy that they recounted these ballots a bunch of times. And one time they recounted it, Bush won. The other time they recounted it, Gore won. And it's like, yeah.
How many elections are rigged, or not rigged, I should say, because rigged means that
you talk about rabbit holes. Like, the question I always ask myself is, people lie and cheat in board games, just for the fun of winning, and people lie and cheat in their careers and jobs. So if you had the ability to do it, to lie and cheat your way to the ultimate seat of power in the world, why wouldn't you? Like, it's not a question of if they try, it's how much they try and how much they get away with and how much is caught. That's the real question.
Hey guys, really quick, I just wanted to jump in here. At this point in the episode, I did lose camera A, so the rest of the podcast is we still got full audio and everything, but you're only going to be seeing Joe. So in post-production, whenever I speak, I'll have that little picture of me like this. So once again, sorry about that, but I had to release this episode with Joe just to wrap up the ending parts of the whole Down the Rabbit Hole for 9/11. So thanks. So okay, I think that we gave a pretty good history as to, like I said, just stuff that leads up to everything in 9/11. So we're really going to kind of jump into all these different theories. So I think one of the underlooked things of this, man, is that like no one really got fired from the intelligence agencies or from anyone that's like heads of state inside the like upper echelons of American government. Like, even think about this, people like Condoleezza Rice was like even promoted higher than she was. There was this guy, General Eberhart, so he was promoted to like a very high military status. Nothing really happened through Don Rumsfeld. What do you think?
Like, so if you take all the narratives at face value and that this was just a terrorist attack, and I know I keep qualifying that statement because that's kind of the question that everyone has in their mind.
Yeah.
But I still don't have an opinion one way or the other. I think for most people, because even if it was a conspiracy, there'd only be a few people involved. For most of the intelligence community and for most of the military, it was a big surprise. It was this big blind spot. The Soviet Union collapses, the whole world releases its shoulders and be like, that was a big thing about the millennium and the 90s was that, world peace forever, because the Soviet Union fell and the only superpower is America. And the one time that we had problem, well, 2 times we had maybe 3 times. I forget when Panama happened. But, we invaded Grenada.
Yeah.
And that was pretty good. And then we invaded Iraq the first time, and that went spectacularly for a war. And so everyone was, we're untouchable.
Yeah.
And even when there were hijackings, because there were hijackings all through the 20th century, none of them ever used them as weapons. They were mostly trying to go to Cuba because they were trying they were trying to escape.
I mean, it's crazy. It's like there was not even a single bullet fired on 9/11.
Yeah, because like I don't know how much the average person at the time would think about it, but I'm sure they were all aware that, when the hijackings first happened, I'm not saying they were calm, but I'm assuming, it's hard to tell you
to some degree. What are you going to do though? It's like you can't fly a plane.
Well, so we'll get to Flight 93, I guess. Yeah. But like the idea was that for the most part you'll be fine. You just let the hijackers make their demands. they'll fly to Cuba, they'll fly to an airport to refuel, and then they'll fly to Cuba, or they'll fly to North Korea, or they'll fly to Venezuela.
Yeah.
They're just trying to make a statement, make a bunch of money, and basically make a hero for themselves in the country that they want to go to not exile, but basically exile to. Because that happened not all the time, but like you could, if you want to pull up a list of hijackings in the 20th century, none of that. There may have been one or two that there were definitely ones that crashed. Like there was one that crashed in the ocean that there's footage of. That's actually kind of crazy.
Really?
Yeah, I could pull that up if you want, but I would imagine until that's part of why 93 was interesting, because the people on the plane had heard about Titan. They knew what happened, and they're like, well,
yeah, the people on 93.
Yeah, they're like,
knew.
well, when now we know we're going to die, so let's go do something about it. But the people in the first planes, like if they knew they were going to die, they probably would have fought back. And even if maybe you're not a pilot, but to be honest, if you took control of that plane back,
yeah,
you maybe could land it. Maybe some people would have survived even if it was a crash landing versus flying it at full speed into a building.
So look at some of these. Are these any of the ones that you were referencing?
Is this?
Yes. Just be careful.
Everyone always Wikipedia. So this is just an interesting little thing here. Destinations desired by U.S. hijackings between 1968, 4 years, 1968 and 1972. There were
90 to Cuba.
Yeah, because communism. They wanted to go to Cuba, and you couldn't go to Cuba, so they're like, "Well, I'll hijack a plane and we'll go to Cuba."
Fair enough.
And so, just between the 80s and 90s, there were 50 hijackings in 1993. There were 25 hijackings in 1994. There were 8 hijackings in 95. There were 16 hijackings in 96. There were 12 in 97, 14 in 98, 12 in 99. There were 22 hijackings in 2002 or 2000. I don't think most people were prepared for the way that these That's why I think it's believable. It's completely believable that the terrorists were like, "How do we inflict damage?" Well, we can hijack a plane. It's pretty easy, and they're not going to shoot us down because they're going to think we're making demands. And I don't know if they actually told. I don't know if I've heard this before or never, but I'd love to know if they communicated with air traffic control at all, pretending to make demands, like to buy time, because they scrambled jets, and like you said, they probably would have shot down 93 if it hadn't crashed.
Yeah.
So
You don't think 93 got shot down then?
Whether it did or not, I think the narrative is fine with me, because the result's the same. They all died, whether they did it by their own actions or whether they were shot down. Let them be heroes, because I think it was they definitely fought back, because there's a guy on the phone on the plane that there's recording of, that's where the term "let's roll" kind of became popular.
Yeah,
so
Todd Beamer.
And so that was kind of his whole thing. And so there's they fought back. Whether they were successful, I don't know. Maybe you would hate to think that they got the plane back and then got shot down, but there was plenty of footage of that. I feel like someone would have said something. But either way, it was they all died, and let them be heroes at least.
I think. Yeah. What do you think though? So if you're in the
no point.
If you're whether you're I'd say you're the president's cabinet, and like I said, they moved everyone around 9:30, 9 a.m. or no, probably 9 somewhere between 9:10 and probably 9:30. They move people that are Washington into the bunker underground.
Yeah.
So I mean, if they originally thought there was anywhere between 4 to 8 I think hijacked planes, and so when they were looking at 93 and whatnot, I think I wouldn't surprise me, because it's definitely confirmed if you look at the actual transcripts, and if anyone wants to know, just DM me and I'll send it to you. But Bush speaks with Cheney over the phone, but Cheney gave the command to shoot down 93 3 or 4 minutes before Bush approved it. So I don't know. I don't think 93 got shot down, in my humble opinion, because when you look at what actually happened, so the plane was upside down, going into the ground like this, and I think it's probably because I think if you Beamer, Burnett, and everybody else got into the cockpit, because they were trying who's the guy? So the guy that flew, Zaid Jarrah, he was was documented that he was, ripping and moving the plane, doing these evasive maneuvers to you literally throw people from getting inside.
Yeah, I think one of the easier ways to look at that is like,
And you can hear in the transcripts where they say, "Put it down, put it down."
yeah. Well, like even back then, it's not like with the Charlie Kirk thing. There's probably like 100 camera angles of that somewhere. With that, there was only news footage after the fact, but there would have been a bigger debris field if the plane got shot up in the sky versus crashing into the ground. And you had a pretty concise debris field, and I haven't heard any, at least me, I haven't heard any conflicting statements from either people from the area or any witnesses that said that there was debris other than where the plane crashed.
Right, and I talked about this, remember Scotland Pan Am Flight 103, where there was debris for 800 miles, and that's when the plane blew up.
Oh, yeah, and you got a plane at 20,000 feet traveling at 500 miles an hour.
Yeah.
That debris is going to keep going for a while, and and there's been like that Pan Am flight that's more of a conspiracy. Was that thing shot down or not? I'd be curious about that. People say it was because anyways.
Yeah, you get the idea.
But no, I don't think either way. I don't think people would have, even if they had gotten control back. Like you can't fault the pilot for following his orders, especially at that point in time. It'd be more interesting if like the Twin Towers never happened and all the planes crashed and that was it. Did they shoot the plane down? That would be more of the ethical question. But I think at that point, you got to shoot the plane down regardless of if they got control. Well, if if you could verify they had control back and like believe it, because like how do you know it's not a ruse? Maybe you don't know who these terrorists are at the time.
Yeah,
they could be KKK terrorists or something crazy like that. And so you got some white guy on the guy or some guy with a convincing accent in the cockpit waving at you. It could still be that. And so you don't want to let them get close. So that's your order. Shoot them down. And that's tragic if it did happen, but I don't think so because there would have been a bigger debris field.
So now I wanted to move on to a couple of things. So I had mentioned this last time, and this is super popular right now in online right now when people like going over 9/11. So this is on Reuters, actually, like obviously super credible site. So I mentioned this in the first or the second one of the first or second episode is that there was 20 or $2 trillion dollars that was missing. So apparently, I'm going to read this article briefly. Like I said, this is on Reuters. So, former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld did not reveal that the Pentagon had lost $2.3 trillion the day before September 11th attacks, contrary to posts shared online that misrepresented his remarks about the missing financial audit trails. So, an audit report, page 4 of this PDF, released on February 25th, 2000, about financial statements for the fiscal year 1999 by the Office of the Inspector General at the U.S. Department of Defense says, for the accounting entries, $2.3 trillion was not supported by adequate audit trails or sufficient evidence to determine their validity. $2 trillion was not reviewed because of time constraints, and $2.5 trillion were supported. So essentially, I could go on and read the article word for word, but essentially, from what I've been looking through this, Joe, is that the Donald Rumsfeld was saying that the day before 9/11 because he was saying the current software and systems that they have to follow the money were so outdated that they needed to be replaced and put in with new stuff, and that's why there hadn't been $2 trillion missing. So that was something where I really am kind of fact-checking myself a little bit live here and saying how, because one of the top 3 things you hear now about 9/11 is the missing Rumsfeld money. Once again, Larry Silverstein's conflicting statements, and then Israel possibly being part of 9/11. So it looks like you're pulling something up as well.
Yeah. So like you said, their claims were accounting errors or the inability to reconcile all transactions that accounted for the complete budget of it. But if that's the story they were going with at the time, and that's the story that it is now, to me it was always kind of a little bit of a red herring to say that was the reason. Because first of all, what so they couldn't stop the hearing from happening by some other means. They couldn't just blow up the building the hearing was supposed to happen in, or they couldn't kill the person that was supposed to go at the hearing. Instead, that they planned this giant elaborate ruse, and you could say that it was just a coincidence, and happy coincidence for them that they had already planned this to go invade the Middle East, and maybe that's true, but I don't see it as evidence one way or the other.
Yeah.
So what? They come out to the public and say that we lost all that, we can't keep account for all this money? What, the public's going to need a 9/11 to not overthrow your government. Like that seems a little bit absurd. You know, like people may have been pissed and people might have got fired, but who even this was the same report the year previous and no one cared.
Right.
You know, they said the same thing the year previous about $6.9 trillion over the course of like 5 years or something like that. That's the same thing. We can't account for it. And it's like, well,
and as of 2024, you know, Pentagon has failed their audit the last 7 years.
It's all this. It's not like that's not the question. Is what they're doing with it. If people really cared, they'd stop paying their taxes. You know, like that's the only way that you're going to get any change. Stop paying your taxes. But you can't stop paying your taxes because that's a felony, and I'm not advocating for a felony. Pay your taxes. But they caused 9/11 so that they would not have to have people worried about not paying their taxes.
Yeah.
I would see more of an argument that, maybe it was a coincidence, but this was propagated to have a war in the Middle East. But
that's where I would fall as well.
I always try to go to Occam's razor for things like that. That it's like the simplest solution is probably what makes sense, and it's not like these entire terrorist organizations were made up. You know, that they wanted if you gave the opportunity to Osama bin Laden and these people, they would do what people say they did. Mm-hmm. And so you're saying that they didn't do it and the U.S. government's responsible. I don't know. That's why I always said if the government knew about it, like say there were some CIA operatives and they heard whispers of it, and then someone told them that, you know, whoever was in charge of getting that information to someone to do something about it just didn't. Yeah. Because they wanted to, I could believe that. But then you're dealing with a group of like 5 or 6 people, and how do you prove that? And then what's the point? You know, the terrorists still did it. Right. They just maybe let it happen. And that, you know, you could say the same thing about a lot of stuff. And so that's more of the question is that.
Yeah. Okay. And once again, as we go through all these, we don't always have to give an opinion. We can just cover the info and move on. Okay. Or if you agree, like there's some stuff in here that I really think I have some legitimate validity. So this is kind of.
I'd be interested to hear it.
Yeah. This is kind of backtracking. This is Condoleezza Rice.
I can't hear this, by the way.
I know I have it on mute. Oh, okay. So this is basically when she mentions that Bush was looking forward to, or not looking forward to, but was planning on invading Iraq, before 9/11 happened. So.
Was detained in China for 11 days. We also moved to develop a new and comprehensive strategy to try and eliminate the Al-Qaeda network. President Bush understood the threat, and he understood its importance. He made clear to us that he did not want to respond to Al-Qaeda one attack at a time. He told me he was tired of swatting flies. This new strategy was developed over the spring and summer of 2001 and was approved by the President's senior national security officials on September 4th. It was the very first major national security policy directive of the Bush administration, not Russia, not missile defense, not Iraq, but the elimination of Al-Qaeda. Although this national security presidential directive was originally a highly classified document, we've arranged for portions of it to be declassified to help the Commission in its work. And I will.
Well, this is her talking after the attack, though.
The strategy set as a goal.
But that. Well, so that's the thing. But I again, if you're questioning the entire narrative as false, or you got to believe that it's not like Al Qaeda wasn't an issue. I believe they were responsible for the attack on the USS Cole in '99. There were a bunch of attacks at U.S. embassies and consulates and things like that. Like, it wasn't like Al-Qaeda was this unknown, out-of-nowhere terrorist group, you know?
We were following them.
They were well aware of it. And
I mean, Alex Station, the CIA subdivision that just covered bin Laden, that was formed in 95.
Yeah. Well, so it's like... If everyone is telling the truth here, or at least being genuine in their intentions, that this is why they declassified it, because they didn't have to declassify that. She didn't have to say that happened. So it's if they were trying to cover it up in their involvement, I don't think that they would a couple days after 9/11 release all this information that they were thinking about this before 9/11, because that does look suspicious. So like if you if you were trying to not look suspicious, I maybe wouldn't say that, or I would at least not declassify what they did. I don't know. Because some days it all makes sense, and some days it's like, these people are evil, and evil kind of dictates what happens a lot of the time. And so,
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm not saying specific, but the people, if they were responsible for it, would be pretty damn evil.
Right. So here's another thing, right? So this is like a secret memorandum from George Bush about the CIA. So the events, or I'll skip that. Let me find this. I'm scrolling down.
That was a big time.
So this is kind of has to do with more like CIA black sites in response to everything going on. I don't think we really talked about this earlier, but in a secret memorandum, Bush grants the CIA new and open-ended authority to capture and detain anyone who it determines poses a continuing serious threat to the United States. Previously, the CIA only had a limited ability to detain specific individuals pending legal charges. The directive sets in motion what eventually becomes a sprawling global network of CIA black sites, or unofficial, undisclosed detention and interrogation centers. The first such detainee, commonly known as Abu Zubaydah, is captured in Pakistan in March 2002 and transferred to a black site in Thailand. So you were talking about the Geneva Convention earlier. Do you want to give any thoughts to that?
I've never been claiming to be an expert on the Geneva Convention. Like he said, they'd only had precedent to detain people pending charges. I think that question comes down to these people aren't necessarily U.S. citizens, and is it wrong to detain people like this?
Well, out of this stuff comes Abu Ghraib, right?
Well, so are these people responsible for what they're being accused of? Are these people terrorists, and are these people murdering people and torturing people? And then so if you need to find more people who are murdering and torturing people, you need to interrogate these people. Yeah. That goes into a whole question about, is torture ethical? There's a good movie about that. I believe it's called Unthinkable with Samuel L. Jackson.
Ooh.
I'm surprised you haven't seen it. The premise of the movie is that there's 3 nuclear warheads set to detonate in U.S. cities, and Samuel L. Jackson is basically this interrogation expert. He's a torture expert. And they got the guy, the guy turns himself in because he wants to be a martyr. And it's all about torturing him, and do you torture his wife, and do you torture his children? Because if you don't, millions of people are going to die.
So an interesting thing at this point, too, is that like right after 9/11, George Bush comes out and says, we do not obviously negotiate with terrorists. But he also says we don't torture people either.
Well,
that actually wasn't true.
Well, yeah, it's
one
good
thing
PR.
I would love to
people don't like torture, and I would agree.
Which I know, and this is the whole thing of like America almost like wanting to have the forward-facing, like, we have our values and our systems and our way of life, and we do things the right way. And, we're invading and going to these other countries, for democracy and all these things, not for oil or money or influence, all this stuff. And so out of this comes, and I think, Joe, you would really like, maybe I should send this to you, but this guy, John Kiriakou, so he was a CIA guy that was under Clinton and whatever, and he was the whistleblower that exposed the torture program in America. So out of this, and some of this is kind of mentioned and shown in Zero Dark 30, where they have the EITs, right, enhanced interrogation techniques. So these were basically, you couldn't, like the Geneva Convention says, you can't torture people, right? But we would go and we would just take certain people, like I said, I mentioned this in episode 2, where Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, like we waterboarded him like almost 200 times, and I think a guy like that almost deserves it. And obviously you don't want to wish torture on anyone, but I think this is where, once again, you look at stuff like, once again, these CIA black sites, like there were some in, like I said, Thailand, Poland, there were ones in Afghanistan and whatnot, where you're not in America, so it's kind of like almost free rule, because you're at these no-name places where it's very...
Yeah. Well, it's also like, in terms of just talking about the Geneva Convention and what they were determined to, I don't know how far Geneva Convention covers terrorist things, because they were written with the intent of armies fighting armies. You can't capture a German colonel and torture him to get information about troop movements.
Yeah.
Because that's his job, to know about troop movements. It's actually kind of fascinating. It's an interesting question about like chivalry and war and things like that. So during the First World War, right before it all started, right? So Serbia, I think it was Serbia, was about to go to war with Austria-Hungary, right? And the Serbian general, who was basically going to be in charge of this entire army, was in, I think he was in Vienna at the time. He was in Austria-Hungary, and they arrested him once the war kicked off. And like he was either the prime minister or like one of the big, it may have been the duke or the emperor or whatever, was like, send this guy home. What are you doing? That's not fair. You can't just arrest him because he was here when the war started. And that's the kind of idea of like this idea behind war in general that we talked about a little bit earlier, that like it's kind of the will of the people. You know, the people express their will to their government executes their will, and if that will requires force to imply, then the war happens usually. So the causes of it could be manipulated, and that's kind of the tragedy of it. But like in a war between two countries, even between Nazi countries and between Nazi Germany and America, there should be these rules about these soldiers, because most of these soldiers are not responsible for the war.
Yeah.
Whereas,
following orders.
Yeah,
yeah. But
even if you, that's more of a question about specifically involved in like the Holocaust and stuff.
And we don't have to stick on it. That was just something I wanted to bring up.
That's a really big question of how many people were, because there were a lot of soldiers responsible for rounding these people up. How much did they know? And there were definitely a lot of, like, proportionally not a lot, but a lot of people who knew about this stuff, and they should be held responsible. But that doesn't mean that you can, especially because it was after the fact. It wasn't like you were trying to torture these people to figure out where these camps were so you could go actively stop it, But it's like if you arrest a colonel and you could save your troop's life, is it, do you torture this guy for information? A lot of people would say yeah, and a lot of people would say no, but then you have to ask that same question about, well, you have this terrorist leader who is not part of any declared army necessarily. They're part of a group that would specifically, and one, they're not even really fighting until we invaded. Like all these people in Pakistan and stuff, they weren't specifically fighting our army. They were devising plans to blow up civilians and kill people that weren't combatants. They weren't providing by the rules of war. Yeah,
and that guy Abu Zubaydah, by the way, that we read on that thing, he was a guy that we thought was Al-Qaeda, but obviously he was not a good person because he was involved in certain terrorism or whatever, but he's still in America because he was, tortured in Guantanamo Bay. And once again, part of these EIT techniques, man, are like these stress positions where like your body's at awkward angle, or they keep you in a box for 4 days or whatever.
Yeah.
Or they expose you to extreme temperatures, cold. They'll do the torture with, they'll have like playing metal, or they'll play one song 1,000 times.
It's mostly psychological.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound unsympathetic.
But also there's a thing of sexual assault even in these prisons.
That stuff, yeah, but I mean that happens in New Hampshire youth detention centers. That was, there's been cases about that's been on trial for all these guys abusing things. That's just wrong no matter how it happens.
Yeah.
But like they could have tortured them a lot worse. They could have like cut these people's fingers off. They could have removed their fingernails. They could have, cut their appendages off one at a time, maim them, injure them.
Yeah, and to be fair, to just also what Joe's saying, guys, is that like if look at like people that were caught in Russia, American cells caught in Russia.
Saddam's regime, Iraq, there were like some of these places that they found, people just chained to the wall and they just they flay them alive.
Yeah.
They're not doing it for any information. They're not doing it for any righteous purchase.
No, it's just
they're not doing
punishment
even if you don't agree with. Yeah. But like the U.S. torture methods, people would say in defense of them that these people aren't fighting by the rules of law, so they don't get to have the rules of law.
So that's what Cheney. That's what. That's where he came from. He's like, it was aggressive, but it was necessary.
Yeah, and then
that's what his
to the point of like detention too is like, previously you'd have to have these guys on charges, but these people aren't U.S. citizens. So they don't get the due process of law of the United States.
So is that what you think?
Well, if you're just talking legally, like the idea that you're allowed to detain these people without due process, well, they're not U.S. citizens, and that comes into more international law that can you do this? And they would argue, well, these people violate international law. They're criminals. They're attacking our country. So what? You'd want them to get permission from Pakistan before they get these people? Well, what if they? I think they did, pretty much, right? Pakistan maybe didn't give them explicit permission, but
I have some stuff on Pakistan
to operate in here. And then, well, what if the country's not cooperating because they're funding these terrorists? Well, do they still get the same protections under international law to say that you can't arrest our citizens if they're using their citizens in a way that isn't a statute with international law? Like, when do they lose that right?
Yeah.
I don't think it's right that they were torturing these people. but I think that it could be justified, you know. And also, there's just the question of, is torture even a viable method of information extraction? Because at a certain point, they'll just tell you what you want to hear. Yeah. So is it really a useful method? And that's why that Unthinkable movie goes really well, because
I'm gonna have to watch that.
Oh, it's really good, because I don't want to spoil too much, because it's not really a spoiler, but the idea that like, you're not going to be able to, the guy who made the bombs, you could torture him a little bit, but he kind of knew he was going to be tortured. So that's the question
like
of
these guys like Ramzi Youssef, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, or whatever. They're so out there.
So that's the question the movie poses: is it all right to torture his wife and his children in order to save the lives of millions of other lives and children from nuclear bombs that this guy is responsible?
Yeah, and that's what that guy. Once again, another guy. I think he was after Kofor Black or whatever, but this guy Jose Rodriguez was a big pusher of like torture.
Yeah,
or whatever.
So these people are innocent that you're doing it to, and it's wrong objectively.
I think he was in the early 2000s, Jose Rodriguez.
But you're not going to be able to torture him, and so what's that information worth to you? And then in the movie makes it really, 3 nuclear warheads, that's millions of people dead. In this, it's maybe they just want the locations of other terrorists, and does that stop people from dying? Maybe. So
I mean, we didn't torture anyone to get to the courier for Bin Laden.
True. Did we ever torture anyone to death?
I know that people died in Abu Ghraib, but that had nothing to do with what was going on.
So, if these people don't die and they're wishing death on other people, well, they're getting off better than what they're doing to other innocent people, and they're not innocent. So it's like, is torture wrong? I think. Yeah, but what else are you going to do?
Cool. All right, so we got a lot more to get to, but I wanted specifically.
That's why you could have this podcast on forever. We could do one about the efficacy of torture and the effectiveness of it.
Maybe we should. I mean,
the history of it. Like, you want to talk about how
I would need FBI or CIA interrogators here.
Like, the fact that this is even a debate at all is crazy, because
exactly, that's what I'm saying.
Not even that, not even medieval, but like during like Victorian England. Well, maybe not Victorian, but just before that, you torture people for faith confessions. The Spanish Inquisition.
Oh, yeah.
You put these people on the rack. You put these people in things where you can never put your neck down. And they're doing these to innocent people who are just, maybe they disagree politically, or they're trying to fight for liberty. Versus
even sleep deprivation, that itself.
Oh yeah, that's what they did to Noriega. That was
I think
funny.
I think they kept KSM for 5, 6, 7 days awake. So anyways, let's move on, because we got a lot of stuff to still get to. So I can't believe I never covered this in the previous episodes, but I never covered the 9/11 Commission report. One, because I think it's obviously, kind of living in infamy afterwards. And so I wanted to throw this out to you, Joe. This is another crazy stat that I found out. So $15 million was spent investigating into 9/11. Only $15 million. And then, get this, that's not only is it absolutely nuts, but it doesn't make any sense, because they spent $47 million investigating the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Think about the differences in importance of what's going on there.
Well, where does that number come from? That's the first thing I'd be interested in. Is like, does that cover everything, or is that just what they spent in tax? Because, it
was incredibly low number. I've found this across many different, whether it's these rogue 9/11 lecturers, or if it's through some of the books that I read, like the Looming Tower or whatnot.
I wouldn't even know where to begin. It does seem like a low amount of money, but also what were they investigating? Like, if the plane blew into the tower, supposedly.
Well, there's endless stuff
I can see that happening. So like.
Well, you have to investigate everything, from Bin Laden to Al Qaeda to the hijackers to everything happening on Ground Zero.
Are they reporting?
The intelligence agencies.
Yeah, but if the CIA was investigating all this information, they're not disclosing how much they're spending on it.
Of course.
Is that part of the $14 million, or is the $14 million only what they spent on?
Well, I'm
drinks
saying
for the convention,
the 9/11
and paying speakers and stuff like that.
So yeah, good point. So anyways,
plus, these are all public officials, so they're getting paid a salary. Is that time that they spent all that money being considered, or is it like they're already getting paid?
I'd assume that would be aside from this. But.
Well, it's it's just that's why statistics are I'd like to know where they come from, because you could say it was only 14 million, or maybe you said it was 14 billion, and it's like, well, does that include the entire operational budget of the U.S. military invading Iraq as part of the investigation? You could say that was part of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's trillions of dollars, though.
That's the real issue, is that they spent all this money on this more for 20 years. That like you
accomplished nothing.
Yeah, you had no extra strategy. You went in there and with this vague idea of installing democracy, you killed Saddam within a year.
Yeah,
you hung him publicly.
But it took us 10 years to find. So, anyways, like I said, we'll have to go a little bit faster through this other stuff. So,
yeah.
The head of the 9/11 Commission, Philip Zelikow, like had crazy ties to Bush. Like he was in there for the transition. Like he was in his administration for especially the the transferring of power when he became president. So he was so close with Condoleezza Rice as well that he wrote a book with her. And this is a guy that's on the 9/11 Commission. So it's like I think that's a huge conflict of interest. I mean, it's not like Alan Dulles being on the Warren Commission, but that's another example. Like look how errant the Warren Commission was, and the 9/11 Commission is almost just as inaccurate.
The Warren Commission specifically, I think, because a lot more people can justify the involvement of the U.S. government or someone in there. I think the 9/11 Commission was never investigating if the U.S. was responsible. They was just trying to figure out who was responsible overseas. And so people who think the U.S. was responsible see it as all a sham. And people who see it as completely the way the narrative said it see it as like, well, there's not much to investigate. So I don't know. That's why I'm like, I don't know. It is a bit strange, but like, if you were that person, he got appointed because Bush trusted him, and Bush wanted to know the truth. And if you trust someone to tell you the truth, put him in charge, and then, well, you can write a book and make a bunch of money about it. Like, and then you writing this book gives more information to people. So how can you complain about, even if it's lies? Then you have lies to corroborate and say, well, he's lying about this or he's lying about that. So at least releasing a book, in my mind, isn't a bad thing. Maybe a little insensitive, but.
Oh, I'm just saying the book with Rice, I don't even know if it had to do with specifically with 9/11.
Oh, it was just about his career?
Yeah. That's what
they all do. I mean,
yeah.
Clinton still speaks at colleges and charges millions of bucks to do it.
So obviously there was some. What do you think? Like the 9/11 Commission got right? Like what are some of the most accurate things? Like obviously it was. The overall just a completely obvious thing about this is like. It had to. I really believe it was. There's so much things that's pointing to the actual hijackers and Al Qaeda and Bin Laden that it's like, oh, this was like they let this happen. George Bush, was just was ignorant and he was lazy and didn't take the time. And once again, it's someone gave me this example where it's like, all right, say like you have your friends Sally, Annie, Rebecca and Hannah that are saying, hey, we're going, like, someone's going to come attack you. Someone's going to come attack you. And then the next day, like, they're saying, oh, Joe, Shane, Dan, and Tibbs are going to come attack you. And then the next day, it's like 5 other random people, Yeah. And the next day. So it's like, it gets so incredibly exhausting. That's where you kind of look at guys like Michael Shore that were, very much sounding the alarm, and John O'Neill as well, even though they're on completely ends of the spectrum. And then you look at the, Richard Clark, who's bringing all this stuff to Bush, and then he has to go to Condoleezza Rice, who's like, well, hey, like, you need to have actual proof that Bin Laden's in this specific place. Like, I guess a great example was Bin Laden, like, one of the theories is that was Bin Laden allowed to escape in Tora Bora?
Allowed? I don't know if he was allowed.
Or they let him escape. Or
they knew he escaped, and then they pretended like they were looking for him in Afghanistan for 15 years when I'm pretty sure they knew he was in Pakistan.
So why did that happen?
Because they were either potentially concerned that they would cause an international incident because Pakistan is a nuclear country and you can't just go around pushing nuclear countries around because they have nukes. Or, I mean, I do like the idiom that, don't attribute to malice what you can attribute to incompetence. I mean, because like you said, going back a little bit, like you said, if two things that I think about when you say that, like, all these people were telling Bush that they're going to attack. The first thing is, well, how do they know what that means? Did anyone ever picture in their mind that they'd hijack airplanes and crash them into the World Trade Centers, or were they more thinking about like, oh, another Oklahoma City bombing, and we're going to step up our bomb measures and don't let the president go stuff? And then the other half of that is like, how much of a boy cried wolf is that? If this guy's telling you that Al Qaeda is going to attack for a year and a half and they never attack, are you going to believe his credibility, or is he?
Well, I know that John O'Neill specifically, I would lean that he was the most. Well, even when the first Yemen attacks, the Yemen bombing, happened in 90. Well, I mean, John O'Neill was probably aware of it in the mid to early 90s, but he was screaming about it, and he ended up dying in the actual once he got actually fired from the FBI because he was at a business meeting with like some classified information in a briefcase, lost the briefcase. ended up finding it like in this from someone else from the hotel. Then the FBI came to him, and FBI was already pissed at him because he was rubbing so many people the wrong way. Because he had a very abrasive, he would wear these like fancy ties and would smoke cigars all the time and had a very abrasive approach. Even when he went to Yemen to investigate the bombing of the USS Cole, I forget what her name is. I'll add it in post production, guys. But I think her name was Deborah something. The ambassador to Yemen and him were like fighting head to head because she's like, hey, you can't just like go walk on everyone here and do what you have to do. You have to be diplomatic with the people, the Yemeni officials and whatever. Like I said, they sent 500 FBI agents to Yemen as soon as it happened.
Well, I think like, not to get off, like that's the biggest question that I have is like, because that's where I wouldn't be surprised that like if they knew something was going to happen and they let it happen. Because that goes more into, like, if you believe in a grand conspiracy, I think the most a grand conspiracy could accomplish would be kind of sowing seeds of dissent and allowing tragedies to happen on their own. Because it's not like, some people think that every tragedy that ever happens is directly responsible from someone, someone perpetrated it. That was,
Sure.
It's entirely believable that 9/11 happened as a result of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. treatment of Muslims and their religious fanatic about it, and it's probably entirely believable that people in upper echelons of power would be less inclined to solve the problem and more just allow the problem to persist because never let a good tragedy go to waste. It was like people say that the ship that Vietnam.
Oh, the Gulf of
Tonkin incident, like that. I think that was staged. That was probably a false flag attack.
That's the most obvious false flag.
Probably, yeah. And then people say that about the Cole, and then people say that about 9/11.
I don't think the Cole was.
Maybe that was their first attempt. If you're really if you got a big tinfoil hat on, maybe it was them blowing up their own ship. Like people say that about the Maine too.
I know, but I covered there was attacks even before the USS Cole.
Oh yeah, well, but that's the question. Do you did someone? Do you send a ship there? It's double-sided. You could send it there as deterrence, but you could also send it there knowing it might get attacked, and that might rile up the people to go invade Yemen. Like, you can have it both ways, and maybe it was neither, and it was just someone thinking that was a good idea, and that's what happened.
Well, we thought it was a good idea when we were sending people to Operation Restore Hope, which was going into Somalia with all the starving people through the the war.
Well, yeah, that ended pretty poorly.
And
but that was a lot due to UN. UN Strategic Command is just not capable of operating in that fashion. Yeah. So, the cooperation was just never going to be there. So that's why, Black Hawk Down, it took forever to get people there because it took forever to get people to go in. What was it? It was wasn't it some African country that had a bunch of troops that they were, or some Thailand or something had a bunch of M60 tanks and stuff like that.
Skipping my mind right now.
But it was that was more just incompetence, I think, going into Yemen versus where some of this, did someone somewhere say, let this go because we want to see where it goes?
Yeah.
Maybe. Did they do that with the intention of 9/11 happening? Maybe. Did they do it with the intention of, it'll just be some bombing, kills a dozen people somewhere, and to me, and that, to that, I'm being that person.
Right. Obviously, you're speaking from a 40,000 foot
12 people is that's if I can achieve my operational objective, those 12 people is okay.
It's an accident, but it's not a tragedy, right? Which is a terrible way of saying it.
Well, it's still evil, but it's not
that's the
9/11 comic book evil. Maybe they blow up the the Oklahoma City bombing because they had tried to blow up the World Trade Center before. They parked a truck underneath and it did, so it's maybe that'll happen again versus that they're going to take planes and crash them in and kill 4,000 people. It's hard for me to believe that could be the government is actually responsible for that or knew that was going to happen and let it happen without someone saying something goes into the controlled demolition. A plane crashing into that building is enough to collapse that building, I would imagine.
Really? Okay. I don't think so at all.
The way that people always say that it looks like a controlled demolition, my argument for that has always kind of been that that's the way the World Trade Center was designed. It was a center column building. Most buildings aren't built like that. It was built that way for open floor space. And so, once you have enough momentum of the building on top of it, because notice how, right there, right? That wasn't a controlled demolition. That was damage due to the thing.
Yeah, I agree.
This whole thing weighs a lot. And it doesn't collapse straight down like in a controlled demolition. It kind of leans over one way.
See how it's... why is there... I wonder why they're shaking, though.
Well, because...
I don't think, to be fair...
Well, because it's going to come to a failure point at some point. Like, it doesn't just happen all at once. It slowly happens as the weight crushes underneath it. And then as one beam breaks, and another beam breaks, and another beam breaks, it gets close enough to that failure point where it all comes down at once because it's just so much pressure. Mm-hmm. Like, people look at this like it's a 5-story hotel. This is like the biggest buildings we've ever made in the United States. And just this section probably weighs, I don't know how much it weighs.
So there was 250,000 tons.
So that's...
each building. So do the math for that.
What was it?
250K and then 2,000 tons. Or 2,000 pounds.
Yeah, so that's 500 million pounds.
Yeah.
And say that's 200 million pounds up there at the top. So I'm going to have to pull up a video to show you what I mean.
Sure.
See, it falls over that way, but on the other side, and by the time it's got all that momentum, it makes sense to me that the building would collapse the way it does because of the way it was built. So let me see if I can
go right ahead.
Find this. Oh, you're over here. Okay.
I would say, I think it's to have a controlled demolition, man. There has to be so many things. So many people have to know, and they have to then go and plant the. They have to plant the charges themselves, and obviously there were people. They're saying, "Oh, there were people inside the towers and that were working, so-called working on the building, whatever." I'm like, dude, there's thousands of people, hundreds of companies inside these buildings. It's like, of course, there's always going to be maintenance and different things working on it. Yeah.
Plus, like, if you were going to do it, and your whole these people are evil enough to commit 9/11, right?
Right.
So why aren't they evil enough to do it on a Tuesday? Why do it on a Sunday when your casualty rate is going to be 10% of what you could actually do? If this was done on a weekday, and everyone was at work, and everyone was in the building because it was a Sunday, right?
No, 9/11 was on a Tuesday.
Was it really a Tuesday?
Yeah.
Why was the building empty then? Because that was the thing. No, there were a lot less people in the buildings than there were supposed to be. Was it a holiday? Was it Patriot?
I mean, it was early in the morning.
So that could be also, but so then do it in the afternoon. If you want to kill as many people as possible, to outrage as many people as possible, why not kill as many people?
Well, I think also but the reason why they went and they chose those flights at that time is because it would be the planes would be full of the gas and the fuel, which when it crashes, it'll have the most.
Well, one of them came from California. Flammability.
Well, they were there. Well, 3 of them were headed to L.A. So, and I think also Tuesday and Thursday were the lightest travel days, so there'll be the less amount of people on the planes. So in order to when they take over the planes, there wouldn't be as much resistance. So yeah, please. I
don't know if
just
this
pulling
is the
something
video,
up here
because they it's a little graphic, but you can see it there. Yeah,
it's actually nuts. Each floor was over an acre wide.
This'll do.
Each tower had 4 basic components. First, you have a traditional core. These are the columns in the core and the columns rise.
So that's the way a normal building is built, right? Is that you've got this, the Empire State Building is built a lot more robustly than the trade centers were. Really? So in my mind, you look at it here. And between the core and perimeter. So that's why it makes sense, at least. And I could maybe find the better place to show this, but that's one why the top of the towers remained intact as they fell. They didn't crumble off because the top of them were much more fortified. And then 2, if you look at the open layout, I'm sorry, no, the open layout. Once you have, look, so you've got all these floors stacked on top of each other.
Yep.
All of the force holding the floors laterally together is in the center.
Oh, you're talking about the pancaking, right?
Yeah, basically. And that's always made sense in the way that's the unique building design, so it would collapse like that. And once you get all that weight, that's why the top of the building stayed together, and as it fell as a unit, because it was held together better than the floors that were hit, that amount of weight just there's not enough time for things to stop and then kind of, like if I drop my phone on the table, it's going to hit this side of the table and then bounce over.
Right.
But if I dropped it on like a stack of toothpicks, there'd be enough weight and force and speed to just collapse the whole thing under itself.
Okay.
Versus like this table's sturdy enough to stop the weight of my phone and flip it off the side.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see how like it was it started kind of drifting. And so like to me, the whole steel beams thing, you don't have to melt the beams in order to weaken it enough that the weight of that top tower bends them. The whole, like, when we make steel, when you ever seen someone make a sword or anything, you don't melt it into, when you forge it, you melt it into liquid, but when you're shaping it, it's not liquid. It's weak enough to bend in a horseshoe shape, just at less than its melting temperature. And so you don't need to melt it in order to get it to bend enough to where it just collapses. And so I've never really, that's always seemed like a false herring to me. Like,
okay,
you saw planes crash into this building. The building's going to collapse.
I'm surprised like the buildings weren't even more destroyed when the planes hit.
Well, so some people will say that they were too destroyed because planes are like, you can look at other buildings that have planes crash into them and usually the planes disintegrate. Like one, these planes are massive. I don't think people understand how big these planes are.
Yeah.
And two,
these
were
747s, right?
No, they were,
or 757s.
They weren't quad jets. They were all two jets, as I understand, but they were big ones. And it's like you got a lot of weight. The fuel's heavy, and you're going fast. That's the simple equation for velocity is mass times acceleration is the amount of energy that you have in here, basically.
Yeah. And
that's a lot. It's a lot of energy, and the plane disintegrated, and no one in there really felt much pain, I would imagine.
No, it's
but you're punching through that outer thing that doesn't have much, and most of the plane probably came to rest around the core, if I had to imagine, and that's where most of your support beams are.
Right, and to be clear, obviously, me and Joe aren't architects or
no, I'm not a
but
professional.
we're trying to communicate the basic parts of what was going on. Okay, so all right, so let's move on to once again the whole thing. So it's before we move on, so jet fuel obviously doesn't melt steel beams is the typical
It's not going to turn them to liquid, but
so steel melts at 2,800 degrees, and jet fuel burns at 1,500. So. That would be the one pushback that some people would have. Like I said, as for
I'll pull it up here. It's fine.
As for World Trade Center 1 and 2, I obviously believe that they, I don't know how it happened, but it did. But however, Joe, I would like to throw this to you. Are you looking up something? It's still in relation to World Trade Center 1 and 2.
Well, I was just like. Specifically, the forging temperature of steel is what you want to look at. Because like they always use that melting point. And I'm like, you're being intellectually dishonest with that terminology, and whether they know it or not, I don't know. Because again, like I said earlier, you don't have to melt the steel in order to create a situation in which that steel is no longer structurally viable. You need to get it to the forging point, which is usually about 70% of what it is. I'll just define it here. So forging temperature is the temperature at which a metal becomes substantially more soft, but it's lower than the melting temperature, such that it can reshape by forging. Bringing a metal to its forging temperature allows the metal shape to be changed by applying a relatively small amount of force without creating cracks. For most metals, it's about 70%, but I could look at... Are we talking... So this was... What kind of steel was this? Carbon steel?
Yeah.
What did you say the temperature was that you quoted?
I said 2,800 for the steel melting. Is that accurate?
Melting point in Fahrenheit or Celsius? Oh, this sucks.
I think Fahrenheit, I believe.
2,500 degrees. Let's say it was high grade, 2,800 degrees. And then the forging temperature is 2,200 degrees. And that's what you would want if you're forging it as a mechanic making it. And then stainless steel is 2,100. Stainless steel magnetic is 2,003. So what'd you say? Jet fuel burns at 1,800.
Jet fuel 15.
1,500. So you still got a bit of a discrepancy there, but at the same time, is I'm not even using the forging temperature as my argument. I'm just saying you heat steel, it's going to get soft, weak, and if you burn this for however long.
It's actually interesting that I think it was the South Tower where there was a whole stairwell that actually was intact.
Oh, there were people in there, too. It was, but and also it's not just that you're putting, you're not in a controlled environment, just putting a bunch of steel beams in a jet fuel. You have to crash a plane into it. How many steel beams does that take out? How much structural integrity do you lose at that point? And then, because the building's not built to minimum specifications, there's an amount of fail-safes, right? The building didn't immediately collapse.
Yeah.
But then you got burning fires in there, and I can perfectly understand how that would cause the building to collapse in the way it did.
Okay.
Because again, if you were, I don't know, maybe the plane thing was necessary. If you're a big conspiracy theory, why not just pretend like it was another bombing in the basement and blow it up that way? If you're going to use controlled demolitions, why
there was a
involve
janitor that said, or that many people reported that day, explosions, whether it was firefighters, janitor, this special janitor, William Rodriguez. But like I said, that's one, that's kind of one person's testimony. And this guy, William Rodriguez,
it's not to be dismissed.
Did take people did take firefighters back into the building through a back way that only he knew. So all right, man, so let's move over to World Trade Center 7. So this is where I think so this quick video also that I'm going to show Joe, this is a short, so there's other different channels that I could have pulled from. I like this one specifically because it kind of just grabbed everything and threw it into one. So this is this channel is called this channel's called Conspiracy Theorist. So, let's listen to this real quick.
Swag. For the first 10 years, I did not think anything other than the official narrative. Then, after being shown a close-up video of building number 7 coming down, and that got me going because it's obvious to me that building 7 was a controlled demolition because the building collapses from the bottom down. The trade centers were unique in that they were designed.
You can add.
And the impact of a jet. From what I understand, the outer skeleton of the building.
Let's see, he's making my points for me.
He's
making my point for me. That's why I'm and just to preface all this, the World Trade Center 7 is a big linchpin in whatever I consider. That's why I'm why if I had to make an opinion, I think that people knew about it ahead of time and were
about Trade Center 7.
No, about 9/11 in general. Somebody somewhere with enough power to set up the demolition of 7, because that was a records building for the U.S. government. So there's things in there that you wanted to get rid of, even if it wasn't a biggest concern in the world. If you knew that.
Yeah, you got bank accounts. You got CIA was in had floors on
But you could just you want to
continue.
Yeah, because he's making the same thing.
Fishnet, and you had these inner core columns, which was substantial, thick steel beams to withstand 4 or 5 times what the loads were. The engineers always over-designed a building. No steel frame building has ever collapsed. And if you could visualize cast iron stoves stacked one on top of each other. The stoves up at the top, yes, there's fire and they've been damaged, but the stoves on the bottom, they haven't been damaged. Okay. So the structure underneath all of that is intact. So it's impossible for a building to collapse near free fall speed and increase
without a controlled demolition.
You're running into the path of most resistance. So something.
Yeah, but with so much power, it doesn't matter what the resistance is at that point. That's my point. But Trade Center 7, why is he schizophrenic there? He starts making a point and then switches. You want to play that again?
Sure, which part? Just
he starts talking about 7, and then he starts talking about the regular trade centers. The whole thing, go back? Most of the...
Yeah, so...
See, he just switches to the trade centers. They weren't designed... Nothing was designed to withstand the impact of a plane. You can't design for that. They designed it that way because they wanted more open floor space, a big consideration in the building.
What about weather and stuff too? When you're way high up there, I'm sure the wind is.
Well, it was over-engineered for a building fire, say a bunch of paper catches fire, and you have a But the idea behind why it was built that way and why I think it was unique enough to collapse the way that it did without a controlled demolition, at least on 1 and 2, were because they built it with that big core in the middle.
Yeah.
There was no support outside of that core. all the floors were, I mean, they were supported by each other. Because you had to, you can't just support it from the middle because you'll get bowing and the building will start bending a little bit outward. So you had to support each floor on the floor below it. And you could do that with a lot less support. I'm getting scatterbrained.
No, I'm trying.
The floor design was that they didn't want columns all throughout these cubicles, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have no columns in your office space, you can fit more people in there, and it feels of more open, less cramped space like older buildings were.
Yeah.
But that also means that in my mind that once the top starts collapsing, it's the path of most resistance, but it's still hundreds of millions of pounds falling. Say that the area that the plane impacted was 3 stories. That's what fell, is that, it fell 3 stories. That's a lot of energy. And I can, and the collapses look consistent if you want to play both of them. It's not like they fell like that 7. That's
so I
7 was.
I only care about 7 because that's where I'm like.
Well, he wasn't talking about that. That's why I was confused.
Well, yeah, he did jump. I wonder if he was a little bit edited there too.
That's what I'm thinking, but it was weird.
The only reason why I pulled this up, like I said, Reddit's kind of, hit or miss or whatever. But this was a cool little fact, is that there's a ship actually from
I heard about that.
1773 underneath the, or that was part of the foundation actually.
Well, because that part of Manhattan was all reclaimed land and stuff like that.
And so it was interesting that, this was the same wood that was used to build the Liberty Hall in Philly. So it's so interesting that this was on the base of what was happening in of the World Trade Center. So, Joe, so here's another popular, or really, I think this could be explained away, but this is a reporting of someone reporting of the fall of the World Trade Center before it actually happens. So look at this. So I think go to. So this is the World Trade Center 7 back here.
Yeah.
New York skyline, a symbol. From our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details
Right here.
Very, very sketchy. As
So-
you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke. And
So the Salomon Burroughs building is World Trade Center 7.
Hold on,
piece of
Sorry.
The Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on.
No, I don't think that's what she meant. I think this guy's trying to mislead you, because she's not. She just said the Trade Center. She didn't. She didn't even say World Trade Center 7.
No, she said the Salomon Brothers building, which is World Trade Center 7. So I think what happens
Didn't she
actually
say
here.
Hold on.
What she just said. I'll repeat it. So she said. She references both of the buildings. She said World Trade Center, or the World Trade Center is still burning.
Well, it was.
In this, which it was, right?
Even after it collapsed.
But before that, she says the Salomon Brothers building, which is also the people that that was also World Trade Center 7. So as I think she's talking, it collapses. You want me to go back again?
Okay. Because I don't think she's.
So here we go. Ready?
I don't think.
So I think it's possible that she just mixed up her words.
You want to go back a little bit before?
As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge.
All right.
Our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
So
Okay,
so look this up.
Okay.
Yeah. So he said that.
Not her. Okay. Hold on.
Look up, is the Salomon Brothers building the same thing as World Trade Center 7?
I don't want to lead it that way. I want to have something say it independent of that search. Hold on.
Hard to
Can you
find.
replay what he said again? Just to be
For the 4th time.
Well, no, because we were replaying her. I didn't know that he was the one that said it.
Yeah, that's the whole reason. It's about him, not her.
Now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Sullivan Brothers?
Salomon.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, like you said, if it is a mix-up, because one, it's BBC.
So that's what I'm saying. I think it probably actually was a mix-up. But I think as she reports it, it actually falls in the background. Watch this.
And ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city.
So she comes back into frame.
Disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of...
See what he said? He said the Solomon building collapsed. That is the
Yeah.
World Trade
No.
Center set.
I gather that. I have seen this before too.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. Yeah.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost
The
sounded
pixelation.
too far-fetched.
But see,
Go ahead.
Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
I don't know. It seems kind of stupid to lynch your whole argument on that. The
That's
news,
fair.
the
That's
BBC, like, yeah, it's one thing to
That's
say
fair.
that was an inside job, but it's hard to say that one BBC guy knew about it, and like he can look at. I honestly think that's just someone told him that's the name of the building.
Yep.
You know, because it was a panic.
I
news
think this
thing.
is good stuff to talk about. So
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure what to think about it either.
That, like-
I don't base. You are absolutely right. You shouldn't base one specific narrative about one thing just because you saw about it.
Yeah, I mean, and I not that I think that this is the answer, but it also could be that wasn't live footage behind her. I mean, News Network, like
So
CNN did
that's
that a
what
lot,
I was
too.
also thinking. Maybe
Is
it was
that, like,
accident. Yeah.
Is that she's behind a green screen and they're projecting that on a green
I know,
screen.
but you see the smoke live. Like,
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
It
so-
could be. Well, yeah. I don't know. It is, but I don't think that one BBC reporter knew, and he was stupid enough to talk about it while the building was in the back of the frame of the lady that he's talking to. Like,
Yeah.
it just seems odd that why would he know? Why would they talk about it if they wanted to get away with it? I mean, maybe people would argue that that's what they do. They put it in your face, and
Yeah.
but it's also like that's kind of stupid.
You want to hear another crazy fact about the day of 9/11? NSA found out about the attacks through CNN. Like some of their people saw like what was going on online on TV.
It was before
And-
cell phone. I probably imagine
Yeah.
most of the people, even if they did have cell phones, they probably weren't allowed to have cell phones
Right,
at
and
work.
think about that day. That like even without people without cell phones, there was an inundation of phone calls that was happening through New York City. People calling their families, calling their bosses, calling their wives,
like
husbands,
like
children.
Emily when she's in her closed off areas at work because she has clearance that she's not allowed to have a phone.
Oh,
so
really?
I'd imagine the NSA
I didn't
people
know
probably one, cell phones weren't. I mean, they were a thing, but I would imagine they were probably like one in every 2 people or 3 people had one. Most people would either have a pager and two, they probably weren't allowed to take those into the closed off areas at the National Security Agency, in case. And so I would imagine that was just how it would happen, is that they're doing their work about whatever. They're playing Tetris on their phone or Tetris on their computer, and then because that's how news used to be. CNN, because especially something like that, you'll get news anchors all over the city. Like that's the only footage of the first plane is some guy doing another news story, and that just happened. So everyone's already ready to do it. They just need to get it on the air, and it's a lot more important back then than it is now because there was no social media. This was how you found out about things,
Right.
So that makes sense,
Cool. So, like I said, a couple more things we got to run through, and then we'll wrap up. So, this is the Larry Silverstein famous video.
Psychologist.
Let me find that.
And then, just minutes later, received a telephone call, returned on a television set, and witnessed this horrendous circumstance. The first plane hitting, and then the second plane hitting. Of course, with the second hit, it became obvious that this was terrorism. But thereafter was absolute hit.
So you can see a little bit. I think Larry Silverstein. I think once again that's one of the similar popular things to go on. I wouldn't be surprised that a billionaire would take out a loan about his huge building, but taking out a terrorist loan to a certain degree is suspicious.
It's suspicious to play devil's advocate because again, I don't know what to make of it because either it's all connected or none of it's all circumstantial. Like, because we talked about it earlier, it's not like these people came out of nowhere. There was the Cole attack. There was already the bombing attack on the World Trade Center before. Did he get the insurance after the first bombing? Because if he got it after, that makes sense. Hey, my building's just got terrorist attacked. Maybe I should get insurance for terrorism. Like, and you know, these billionaires probably know more than the average person. So maybe someone around them told them, listen.
They did have the 93 bombing in retrospect.
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
what I'm. Yeah, so I'm.
So
like,
I wouldn't be surprised.
And so he was recently bought the buildings, and then it's kind of like flood insurance. Regular insurance, I don't think would have covered an act of terrorism.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, I need this extra insurance because they've already tried to blow these buildings up.
Right. And no one died in the World Trade Center bombing. That fell at like 5:20 p.m. Like I said, hours later, and they evacuated everyone out of the building.
Yeah. So it's it's strange. It is very circumstantial, and if you could prove to me that they were an inside job, I would say that maybe he knew something, that maybe someone told him, hey, listen, maybe you should get some terrorist insurance this week, not next week, you know. So it's not out of the question. I don't see I don't have enough overwhelming evidence to say, because you could point that out about anything, you know. Like, are we going to talk about, was Lincoln's assassination a conspiracy? Maybe.
Yeah, I don't think so. But so are you aware of what happened on September 10th? Like George Bush was meeting with
last week.
Bin Laden's
Charlie Kirk gets assassinated.
Yes. Well, also on September 10th, 2001, Bush met with Bin Laden's brother, Shafiq Bin Laden.
Really? Huh.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mentioned this, said in part 2, but I'll go over it real quick. Then we'll move on to a couple more things and wrap up. But so yeah, they met at a Ritz-Carlton hotel, just miles from the Pentagon. So this guy, Shafiq Bin Laden, was invested in Bush's company, Arbusto Energy. There are other Bushes also involved in this. It's a big company, and when Bush was working in oil beforehand. So the Carlyle Group was an investment fund, and it was a defense contractor. So this conference continued even it lasted for a couple more days even after the attacks. And another crazy conflict of interest is that Bush stayed on as an advisor for this investment company for 2 more years after the attacks. Just interesting, right? So I'm not. The reason of this podcast is to bring everything up, so people know. So other things like this that are just kind of crazy to think about is that the Attorney General John Ashcroft was ordered not to fly 6 weeks before 9/11 because of potential threats towards his life, which I thought was interesting. And I think, obviously, Joe, you should look this up too. There is a possibility of a fifth plane, actually, that was covered by TMZ just 2 years ago. I don't really bank a lot on it being true or not true, but it's definitely just something to think about. Where they found they found another flight. Like I said, there's a whole 50-minute documentary. They were Muslims of similar descent in first class. Obviously, we don't want to do racial profiling or whatever, but they ended up finding that the plane never took off. But then there were people that were masked in burqas with usually wearing women's clothing, but then there were people that had hairy arms and legs and covered eyes, and they box cutters were found on board. And then when they were embarking the plane, they were lost track of some of the people on the manifest, etc. So
yeah, I can believe that. You look at those numbers of hijackings, it's
right,
crazy.
So it's just possible once again. And then even the Deputy Attorney General Michael Chertoff was so when all the 9/11 dust and debris was actually all taken out and shipped to China.
I mean, if you're not going to use it for investigation, you might as well sell it.
Well, a lot of what was going on there was not used for investigation.
That is supposed, yeah. Yeah, this is why I'm I was still unprepared for this podcast, because it's just so much information to keep a track of, and it's and then
I've put a lot of time into this, so I know
And then so what? We prove here today that 9/11 was an inside job. And then what? Who cares? What are you going to do about it? Half the people that would have been involved are dead now.
I wouldn't quite say that, but the whole reason why is that we're supposed to cover all the conspiracy theories.
Oh no, I get it.
So that's what we're.
No, I'm not disputing
I don't.
the point of
and
it.
I said before, I don't think
know.
9/11 was an inside job, but I think there was many things because you can't have at this point you can't have hundreds of people know about this. It just doesn't. I don't think it works quite that way.
That's why it's more. I just think that they probably knew about it ahead of time in some capacity, whether it was to the extent that they imagined.
Yeah,
someone in some CIA listening post had to know something, whether they were intentionally withholding it or whether they were just ignored and no one said anything because that would look so bad if Bush literally was told, "Hey, tomorrow they're going to blow planes up into these buildings," and he didn't believe him. Then you're not going to hear about.
Yeah,
that.
and Bush's reaction was very, very normal.
I don't think Bush did anything. Jeez, we talked about that at the beginning. Like
that's
Dick
what
Cheney was in charge. No, Bush.
I know. That's what I'm saying. His reaction to everything was, or I shouldn't say normal, but it was very appropriate for what happened. You know, he did his best to stay grounded and whatever. And I think, I've talked about it in the past. I covered it, like I said, in the end of the other podcast, but I think there is something to do with the dancing Israelis conspiracy. I think at times, these guys, man, basically had all the, from box cutters to money in the sock to celebrating the events, and then they were detained for 71 days and then they ended up getting deported to Israel, and then these men go on like a TV show and admit that they were there to document the event. And I think that specific urban moving systems where they were where their job was, it definitely obviously was a Mossad front because they were like looking for people that were funding Hamas and Hezbollah inside the U.S.
Yeah, well, like could they be celebrating because this then now the U.S. is going to get involved in the Middle East? Like
I think so, yeah.
And plus they're not what do they care? They're not Jewish people dying, so
yeah, they're really and obviously
they didn't know. I don't think those people knew that.
No, and I think there's over 100 obviously people of Jewish descent that did die that day.
Yeah.
But that wasn't,
No, they weren't there to cause it. I think, and especially when they said that they were there to document it, they weren't there before it happened. I would imagine they were told to go there after it happened.
Well, no, actually, so it's been proven that they were actually at that parking lot in Hoboken at 8 a.m. And the attacks happened, 8:46.
Why were they there, though? Were they there to document it ahead of time, or were they there for some other reason? And then more people showed up to document it, or
I would trust what they ended up saying. But once again,
well, they could be lying for attention too. I mean, because if you were there, and
I wouldn't think this would be a good thing to lie about. Also, these 5 guys that gave their names or whatever, like I said, two out of the 5 of them apparently had ties to once again military intelligence. But then I've also heard that when they got back to Israel, their names were erased from Israeli records, which doesn't surprise me. And so I would say the last thing I wanted to bring up, obviously there's people, as we know, our good friend Alex Jones did actually at times predict that 9/11 or something similar was happening. I know you could say that about certain people, but are you aware of the Bill Cooper story as well? He was another guy that was kind of like a radio host that was very much once again, his background and whatnot, looking into how he was very outspoken about the government. He died from the police raiding his house and all this stuff. So
yeah, again, that would have to point to some grand overarching conspiracy versus more of reading the temperature of the room. I think as crazy as Alex Jones can be at times, he is decent at reading the cultural room, and it's not
except
like
for Sandy Hook.
This is why people will talk about people who claim to be prophets and things like that. Like, it's not that hard to predict pretty generic events that would happen in the vague near future. 1, because it was already a terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. 2, because a couple years prior you had a terrorist attack on a U.S. military base. 3, because the Bush administration, like we had pointed out, was already talking up Al-Qaeda and all this crap ahead of time. It wasn't like this stuff came out of the blue. There was a big concern. It was like you said, it was the first major foreign policy announcement by the Bush administration was Al-Qaeda. So to say that Alex Jones can be like, yeah, there's going to be some big terrorist attack and it's probably going to be New York, because why wouldn't it be New York? I don't know. That doesn't so he knew about it and he didn't try to stop it any more than just
No, that's not what I'm saying.
No,
at all.
I know.
I'm saying
Yeah,
he was aware. It's interesting to see that, like, he once in a while, like, he was right about some.
He's been right about a lot of.
Yeah, I'm not going to.
But he just doesn't like the funny.
He covered Bohemian Grove and all that.
Well,
a lot of people weren't aware of that.
Yeah, the funny one people point to is like he's turning the frogs gay, and it's like, well, that's not really what's happening, but that is kind of what. Like the way he said it sounds really stupid, and
he's in the area code, but not the room, right?
Yeah, it was that these pesticides that are being used at these farms are running off into the water, and that these pesticides change the hormonal balance of frogs and basically makes it so they can't reproduce anymore, and that it gets them confused and attracted to male and female frogs, and so they basically they just can no longer reproduce. There's a lot more stuff about that is not as funny as the frogs being turned gay by the water, but it's also that it's not about the frogs, it's about the fact that this runoff's going into water that people are drinking. And so what is this doing to people's hormonal balances and their reproductive systems if it's fucking up frogs this badly? This is Monsanto and all these big companies that people are like, yeah, these companies are poisoning the water in a lot of places. But because Alex Jones is this crazy crackpot that says that the frogs are turning gay as some sort of like adjustment to how everyone else is turning gay, like I don't think that they're necessarily related, but that concern is still a major issue that, yeah, people are getting kind of fucked up by these chemicals. I mean, you look at thermidylide. I'm not saying that right.
Formaldehyde?
No. The children of I think it's thermidylide. It was a I don't remember what it was. Was it a? Why were they giving it to pregnant women?
Anyway,
no, but it was this drug that women were taking that was recommended to them, and it basically like all their kids came out with like massive deformities, and it was one specific town, and it was like I don't know if it was medication or something in the water or the air or whatever, but it was like what? So if someone said something about that and he sounded crazy, but he was right, we're just going to discount that that's still happening, even though this crazy guy is against it, Like a broken clock still right. Yeah, twice a day.
I wouldn't even say Alex Jones is that wrong or whatever. So.
Oh, I know, but he's abrasive and he's a media personality and he does it for attention, and so he detriments his own messages.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for anyone else, I'll just end on these last two things. So there are a couple people, if you want to, that I would really trust. This guy, Christopher Bollin, his last name is spelled Bollyn. He did a lecture as well, or as there are a couple people, but just about some more, like if you really want to just go crazy and be paranoid and scared for the rest of your life.
Well, I wouldn't recommend doing that.
Look at his lectures that he's done. They're on Spotify and YouTube. And there was this guy, Kurt Sonnefeld, who was actually he was a person that was sent to document the actual once again to document all the cleanup of the World Trade Center and whatever, and his original story as well. So I'm gonna end on this last thing, man, like that I've never been aware of up until like really last night and today, is that the Pakistani narrative about 9/11 and their involvement. So there was this female FBI agent. Her name was Sybil Edmonds. She testified to the 9/11 Commission for over 3 hours, actually, about this. And it was she had a colleague as well that joined her, and she was basically claimed that her superiors were. She came on as like a translator for to handle all the materials coming in, like right after 9/11 happened. And she testified that she had a superior who was smuggling information and giving it to a foreign entity that was probably. Arguably Iran, but it's up for a debate. And so
I believe it.
An interesting thing is that the head of the Pakistani intelligence, this guy, what was his name? Mahmoud Ahmed. So he was in Washington a week before meeting with Tenet.
Christopher Nolan movie?
Yeah. George Tenet, the head of the CIA. And it's really interesting because 5 days after this meeting, the head of the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, his name was Ahmed Shah Massoud. So he ended up getting killed by Al-Qaeda. And so the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan really believed that the ISI in Pakistan was involved in his death, and they ended up fighting about this guy, the head of the ISI at the time, that went and met with George Tenet. Ended up getting I think a month after the September 11th attacks, he had to step down because he ordered a guy underneath him to wire $100,000 to Muhammad Atta. And,
that just sounds like classic espionage.
Yeah,
like talk about World Trade Center 7. That's why it was there. That's not even a conspiracy. The reason why that CIA field office was there was to monitor and potentially entice diplomats that were at the UN into becoming CIA assets and selling them information.
And apparently the CIA helped form the ISI in Pakistan anyways.
So what's to say that other countries don't do that? That's like the entire MO is that you find these people that may not be completely ideologically aligned, and you're like, here's $1 million. Just it's not that much.
So that's where I think when we're like, oh, hey, $2 trillion is missing, I'm like, well, some of this money has to go to black projects and you know, whatever new technology is being worked on through.
When
I say Area 51, I mean I'm talking about like, you know, the 2025's like U-2 spy planes, like whatever technology that is.
Stuff like that, like you said, for all these dark sites, they can't operate on the books. So how much money's there, and then they fund their own operations a lot.
But it just blows my mind too. Is like once again, I think as we both agree, like I believe that Pakistan definitely knew and had knowledge of Bin Laden. Like I said, he was 0.8 miles from their what's the word? What's our top military school? I'm already having a blank.
Oh, West Point.
Yeah, their West Point was 0.8 miles away. Like you could see it from his roof. So there's no way they didn't know Bin Laden was there. And obviously with Pakistan, that's one of the conflicts of interest where we're not enemies with them, but we're not allies by a mile. So Joe Fournier, thanks again, man. It was a marathon, and we'll see maybe at some point if we ever if we want to do something covering the passing of Charlie Kirk and everything. But thanks for helping me work through all this. And like I said, I'm glad to close this chapter on 9/11. I think we did a great job. And like I said, we'll see you next time. Thanks again, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. Peace.
See if I can find something.